We are counting down 25 school cafeteria lunches from the 1960s that vanished forever. These were the meals slid across steam tables onto molded plastic trays, dished out by lunch ladies in hairnets who fed a whole generation on government surplus and a razor-thin budget. From creamed mystery meat on toast to desserts that wobbled under the fluorescent lights, each dish tells a story of post-war plenty, penny-pinching menus, and a country still figuring out how to feed its children at scale. Expect flavors your own kids would refuse, ingredients pulled straight from USDA commodity crates, and the strange comfort of a warm tray on a cold day. Which forgotten lunch tops the list? Let us begin the countdown with number 25. Number 25, creamed chipped beef on toast. Before it ever hit a school tray, it fed soldiers, and the soldiers gave it a nickname too crude for the lunch line. Thin slices of salty dried beef were simmered in a thick white sauce, then ladled over squares of toasted white bread until the bread went soft and gray at the edges. It was cheap, it was fast, and it stretched a few ounces of meat across an entire cafeteria. The lunch ladies could make vats of it from a tin of dried beef and a river of milk gravy, and on cold mornings, the steam rose off the pans like fog. Kids either loved the salt or gagged on it, with almost no middle ground. As taste turned against heavy cream sauces and sodium became a dirty word, chipped beef quietly slid off the menu and never came back. Number 24, liver and onions. Few dishes were feared quite like the day liver appeared on the steam table, its dark, iron-heavy smell drifting down the hallway long before the bell rang. Cafeterias served it because it was one of the cheapest cuts a school could buy, packed with the iron and vitamins that mid-century nutritionists prized above flavor. Slices of beef or pork liver were fried firm and smothered in limp, translucent onions, then dropped beside a scoop of mashed potatoes that most kids used as a barricade. Teachers enforced the clean plate rule with military seriousness, and stories still circulate of children hiding gray slabs in milk cartons or napkins. But you cannot force a nation of children to love organ meat. As offal fell out of American favor entirely, liver disappeared from lunch lines, mourned by almost no one who was made to eat it. Number 23, salmon loaf. On Fridays, when Catholic families abstained from meat, the cafeteria reached for the humblest fish it had, canned salmon, bones and all. Lunch ladies mashed it with crushed crackers, a beaten egg, and a little onion, pressed the mixture into long pans, and baked it into a firm pink loaf they sliced like meatloaf. The tiny, soft bones were mashed right in, a fact that horrified kids who found them and delighted the cooks who knew they added calcium for free. A single case of canned salmon could feed hundreds, which made it a Friday workhorse across the country. Served with a wedge of lemon and a scoop of peas, it was plain, oily, and unmistakably of its era. When fish sticks and frozen fillets arrived cheaper and easier, the salmon loaf pan went to the back of the cupboard for good. Number 22, creamed spinach. Somewhere between Popeye's fame and the USDA's crates of canned greens, creamed spinach became a fixture of the American lunch tray. Cafeterias took dull olive green spinach from commodity tins, warmed it, and bound it in the same white sauce that seemed to cover half the menu. The result was a soft, faintly metallic mound that kids pushed to the far corner of the tray with genuine suspicion. Cooks defended it fiercely, insisting the cream made the vegetable go down easier, and mothers of the era backed them up. It was iron, it was cheap, and it checked the vegetable box on the required lunch pattern. But creamed vegetables depended on scratch sauces and time at the stove, and as labor grew expensive and frozen sides took over, the creamed spinach pot cooled for the last time. Number 21, succotash. This mix of corn and lima beans carried a heritage older than the country itself, borrowed from Native American kitchens and kept alive by thrift. Cafeterias loved it because both crops arrived by the case through the government commodity program, and combining them turned two cheap vegetables into a single filling side. The corn was the easy part. It was the pale, mealy lima beans that made succotash the most negotiated item on the tray, traded away, hidden under napkins, or left to sit until the lunch bell freed everyone. Cooks scooped it out anyway, ladle after ladle, certain the beans were good for growing bodies. As children's tastes narrowed and lima beans became shorthand for everything kids despised, succotash lost its place on the rotation and faded into cafeteria memory. Number 20, tuna noodle casserole. Few dishes captured the mid-century cafeteria better than a bubbling pan of tuna, egg noodles, and cream of mushroom soup crowned with crushed potato chips or crackers. It was the ultimate stretch meal, a couple of cans of tuna disappearing into a mountain of noodles that could feed a whole grade. The lunch ladies assembled it in enormous sheet pans, baked it until the edges crisped and the center went soft, then cut it into steaming squares. That salty, creamy comfort defined lunch on a gray afternoon, the kind of food that fogged the cafeteria windows. Casseroles like this leaned entirely on canned soup and cheap starch, a formula that felt modern in 1965 and dated by the 1980s. As fresher standards took hold and the casserole fell out of fashion at home too, tuna noodle quietly vanished from the tray. Number 19, chicken a la king. For all its plain cooking, the 1960s cafeteria had a few dishes that reached for elegance, and this was the crown jewel. Diced chicken and peas swam in a rich cream sauce flecked with red pimento, ladled over toast points, a split biscuit, or a mound of white rice. The pimento made it look almost fancy, a splash of color on an otherwise beige tray, and cooks served it with a certain pride. It was a clever way to turn a small amount of chicken into a generous, glossy portion that filled hungry kids without emptying the school's budget. Yet a LA King lived or died by its scratch-made sauce, simmered and stirred by hand in the early morning hours. When scratch cooking gave way to portioned, pre-packaged entrees, this modest taste of luxury slipped off the menu. Number 18, turkey tetrazzini. Named for an opera singer and beloved by frugal kitchens everywhere, tetrazzini was how the cafeteria used up whatever turkey was left after the holidays or arrived cheap from the commodity program. Shredded turkey, spaghetti, mushrooms, and a creamy sauce were folded together, dusted with cheese, and baked into a golden, bubbling casserole. It smelled like Thanksgiving on a Tuesday, a comforting reminder of home in the middle of a long school week. Cooks could build it from scraps and pantry staples, which made it a favorite among the lunch ladies balancing the books. But like every casserole of its kind, it demanded time, big ovens, and hands willing to stir. As convenience food swept through school kitchens and turkey moved to sandwich meat, the tetrazzini pan was retired for good. Number 17, American goulash. Depending on which part of the country you grew up in, they called it goulash, American chop suey, or just plain macaroni and beef, but the recipe barely changed. Elbow macaroni, browned ground beef, and stewed tomatoes were stirred together in a pot big enough to bathe in, seasoned lightly, and served in a steaming heap. It was the definition of cheap and filling, a dish that turned a pound of commodity beef into lunch for a classroom. Kids liked it because it was soft, mild, and forgiving, the rare cafeteria offering that rarely got traded away. Cooks liked it because it was nearly impossible to ruin. Yet as schools moved toward portioned trays and branded entrees, the humble pot of goulash lost out to individually wrapped convenience, another scratch dish that simmered its last on the steam table. Number 16, hot beef over mashed potatoes. In the heartland especially, few lunches said comfort like a scoop of mashed potatoes buried under sliced commodity beef and a flood of brown gravy. The beef came in institutional cases, slow cooked until it fell apart, then piled over potatoes or egg noodles and drowned in gravy the cooks thickened by the gallon. It was heavy, warm, and deeply satisfying on a cold winter day. The kind of meal that sent kids back to class ready for a nap. This was food built for growing bodies and long afternoons, dense with calories at a time when nobody counted them. But the dish depended on cheap surplus beef and cooks willing to braise it for hours before dawn. When budgets tightened and prep hours were cut, the gravy boat ran dry and the hot beef lunch disappeared. Number 15, Salisbury steak. No dish is more tangled up with cafeteria memory than the Salisbury steak, the oval patty of seasoned ground beef swimming in glossy brown gravy dotted with onions and mushrooms. It was invented decades earlier as a health food, then reborn as the ultimate institutional entree, the star of school trays and TV dinners alike. The lunch ladies pressed patties by the hundreds, baked them in long pans, and drowned them in gravy that hid a multitude of sins. Kids called it mystery meat, half in complaint and half in affection, cutting it with the side of a fork because knives were rare. It stretched cheap ground beef into something that felt like a real dinner. As scratch patties gave way to stricter nutrition rules and leaner tastes, the Salisbury steak slid off the menu into legend. Number 14, meatloaf. The Monday meatloaf was as reliable as the school bell, a thick slab of ground beef bound with breadcrumbs, egg, and onion, glazed on top with a sweet smear of ketchup. Cooks mixed enormous batches by hand, pressed them into sheet pans, and sliced the baked loaf into portions that landed beside mashed potatoes and a scoop of corn. It was the cafeteria's answer to a home-cooked meal, familiar enough that even picky eaters usually cleared the plate. Cheap ground beef and stale bread turned into a hot, filling lunch that asked little of the budget. But meatloaf was labor in its purest form, mixed, shaped, and baked from raw ingredients by hand every week. When schools traded scratch prep for frozen portioned entrees, the sheet pan meatloaf and its ketchup crown quietly disappeared. Number 13, shepherd's pie. When the cafeteria needed to make a little meat feel like a lot, out came the shepherd's pie, layered in deep pans and baked until the top turned golden. A base of ground beef and gravy, sometimes studded with peas and carrots, was crowned with a thick blanket of mashed potatoes and browned under the heat. Cutting into it released a puff of steam and the smell of beef and butter, a small event on an ordinary school day. Cooks loved it because it hid stretched, humble ingredients under a comforting crust of potato, feeding a crowd for pennies a serving. It was thrift disguised as generosity. But the layered casserole took time to assemble and big ovens to bake, luxuries that vanished as kitchens shrank and shortcuts multiplied. The shepherd's pie pan was among the first to go. Number 12, Spanish rice. Long before salsa outsold ketchup, the cafeteria's idea of bold flavor was a scoop of Spanish rice, tomatoey and mild, sometimes flecked with green pepper or a little ground beef. Rice arrived by the case through the commodity program, and mixing it with canned tomatoes turned a plain starch into a tinted savory side with a hint of adventure. It stained the tray orange and left a faint sweetness on the fork, exotic by 1960s lunchroom standards, even if no Spanish kitchen would recognize it. Cooks appreciated how far a bag of rice could go and how easily it filled the corner of a tray. It was cheap volume dressed up as variety. As menus modernized and real regional cooking entered schools, this timid, tomato-tinted rice lost its novelty and slowly faded from the rotation. Number 11, chili and a cinnamon roll. To anyone who grew up outside the Midwest, the pairing sounds like a mistake, but to millions of kids, it was the best day on the lunch calendar. A bowl of mild, beefy chili arrived on the same tray as a warm, frosted cinnamon roll, and the ritual was to alternate bites, spicy, then sweet, until both were gone. No one is quite sure how the combination started, though thrifty cooks and a need to fill trays surely played a part. The chili delivered protein, and the roll delivered comfort, and together they cleaned out the pantry. In pockets of the country, especially the Plains states, the tradition survives to this day. But as a widespread staple, the great chili and cinnamon roll lunch has faded to a cherished, region-specific memory. Number 10, Franks and beans. Nothing stretched a school budget quite like a scoop of baked beans crowded up against a sliced hot dog. The dish kids across the country knew as beanie weenies. Both came cheap and by the case, the beans sweet and molasses dark from the commodity program. The Franks sliced into coins so a few could feed many. It was salty, sweet, and utterly filling, the kind of lunch that stuck to your ribs through a long afternoon. Cooks warmed it in enormous pots and ladled it out fast, one of the quickest meals on the whole rotation. Kids rarely complained because it was soft, familiar, and just a little bit fun. But as nutrition standards came for sodium and processed meat, the franks were cut back and the beans lost their partner. The beanie weenie tray slowly vanished. Number 9. Fish sticks on Friday. For decades, Friday meant fish, a nod to the Catholic families who filled mid-century schools, and the cafeteria's answer was the humble breaded fish stick. Golden rectangles of pressed fish came frozen and fried up crisp, served with a squeeze packet of tartar sauce and a wedge of lemon nobody used. They were mild, uniform, and easy, a far cry from the bony salmon loaf they replaced, and kids generally accepted them without protest. A tray of fish sticks, a scoop of macaroni, and a carton of milk was the reliable end to a school week. But as frying disappeared under new health rules and the Friday tradition weakened over the years, the classic fried fish stick gave way to leaner baked fillets. The crisp, greasy rectangle of childhood memory largely swam off the menu. Number 8. Corn dogs. Of all the lunches that made a cafeteria erupt with joy, few beat Corn Dog Day, when a battered hot dog on a wooden stick landed on the tray like a carnival treat. The cornmeal coating fried up golden and slightly sweet, and kids dragged it through ketchup or mustard with pure delight. It was cheap, portable, and required almost no plate at all, which made the lunch ladies happy too. For a moment, the lunchroom felt less like an institution and more like a state fair. But the corn dog carried two fatal flaws for the modern era. It was fried, and it was a processed hot dog wrapped in refined batter. As rules cracked down on both, the deep-fried corn dog was reformulated, baked, or dropped entirely, and the carnival on a stick largely disappeared. Number 7. Sloppy Joes. There was no dignified way to eat one, and that was the whole point. Ground beef simmered in a sweet, tangy tomato sauce was spooned onto a soft hamburger bun until it overflowed, and kids ate it with both hands as sauce ran down their wrists. Sloppy Joe Day drew genuine excitement, a rare cafeteria meal that felt indulgent and a little rebellious. Cooks built it from cheap beef and canned sauce, stretching a small amount of meat across an entire lunchroom for next to nothing. The mess was part of the fun, the flavor sweet enough to please the pickiest eater. But the sweet sauce carried sugar and sodium that later standards frowned upon, and the messy open sandwich fell out of favor in tidier, healthier lunchrooms. The great Sloppy Joe slowly wiped itself from the tray. Number 6. Scalloped potatoes and ham. When the cafeteria wanted to turn cheap ingredients into something that tasted like Sunday dinner, out came pans of scalloped potatoes and ham, layered thin and baked until bubbling. Slices of potato were stacked with diced commodity ham and covered in a creamy, cheesy sauce, then baked slowly until the top browned and the kitchen smelled like a holiday. It was rich, warm, and filling, the kind of dish that made a school lunch feel like a real meal. Cooks loved how far a little ham could go when buried among potatoes and cream. But the dish was a labor of love, sliced, layered, and baked by hand over a long morning. As scratch cooking disappeared and kitchens leaned on frozen sides, the scalloped potato pan was among the casualties, its comfort lost to convenience. Number 5. Jell-O salad. To a child of the 1960s, dessert often wobbled, shimmered, and came in colors not found in nature. The Jell-O salad was a cafeteria institution, bright cubes or molded rings of gelatin with fruit cocktail, mandarin oranges, or even shredded carrots and a spoonful of cottage cheese suspended inside. It jiggled on the tray under the fluorescent lights, cold and sweet and faintly strange, a small marvel that fascinated as much as it fed. Cooks made it in enormous pans, cheap and colorful, and easy to portion, checking the dessert box on the required lunch pattern for pennies. For a while, suspending fruit in gelatin felt like the height of modern cooking. But as sugar came under scrutiny and tastes matured, the savory sweet Jell-O mold slowly wobbled its way off the menu forever. Number 4. Tapioca and butterscotch pudding. Long before pudding came sealed in plastic cups, the lunch ladies made it by hand in deep pans and scooped it into little bowls that landed on the corner of the tray. Butterscotch was the crowd favorite, sweet and golden with a faint skin on top. But tapioca had its own strange fame, the pearls earning the cruel nickname frog eggs from kids who ate every spoonful anyway. Cooks stirred the pudding on the stove until it thickened, a small daily act of care in a busy kitchen. That warm, homemade bowl of sweetness was often the highlight of the meal, the reward for finishing the vegetables. But scratch pudding took time and attention, and pre-portioned cups eventually made it obsolete. The hand-stirred pudding, skin and all, quietly disappeared from the lunch line. Number 3, fruit cocktail in heavy syrup. Nearly every tray of the era carried a small compartment of canned fruit cocktail, glistening in its sugary syrup, a mix of diced peaches, pears, grapes, and a single coveted maraschino cherry. That lone cherry sparked negotiations across the lunch table, traded for cookies, milk, or favors, the most prized object on the entire tray. Canned fruit arrived cheap and endless through the commodity program, and it satisfied the fruit requirement without a knife or a moment of prep. It was sweet, soft, and reliable, the same in every cafeteria in every state. But the heavy syrup was essentially sugar, and as fresh apples and oranges became the standard, the syrupy cup fell out of favor. The little bowl of fruit cocktail, cherry and all, slowly vanished from the American lunch tray. Number 2, the scratch-made yeast roll. Before packaged bread ruled the lunchroom, the cafeteria filled with a smell no factory could match. Warm yeast rolls baking from scratch in the early morning. The lunch ladies mixed the dough by hand, let it rise beside the ovens, and baked trays of soft, golden rolls that arrived at the counter still warm, ready for a pat of butter or a drizzle of honey. That smell drifted down the hallways and into classrooms, and kids counted the minutes until lunch. For many, the roll was the best part of the entire meal, proof that someone in the building had woken before dawn to make something by hand. But scratch baking demanded skill, time, and labor the schools could no longer afford. When budgets tightened and packaged bread took over, the homemade roll and its unforgettable aroma vanished for good. And finally, in first place, the peanut butter bar. No cafeteria dessert is mourned quite like the peanut butter bar, a dense, chewy square of oats and peanut butter crowned with a slick of chocolate frosting that kids would trade anything to get. The lunch ladies baked them in enormous sheet pans and cut them into thick squares, and their appearance on the tray could turn an ordinary Tuesday into the best day of the week. That combination of salty peanut butter and sweet chocolate was pure childhood, the flavor grown adults still chase in vain today. For decades it was a beloved fixture, cheap to make and universally adored. Then two forces ended it at once: the rise of peanut allergies, which pushed peanut butter out of schools entirely, and stricter nutrition rules that had no place for a frosted dessert bar. Just like that, the most beloved cafeteria treat of all vanished forever. From the salty chipped beef that opened our list to the legendary peanut butter bar at the very top, these 25 lunches tell the story of how America once fed its children, on thrift, on surplus, and on the hands of lunch ladies who cooked from scratch before dawn. What replaced them was cleaner, safer, and healthier, but a little colder too. If one of these landed on your tray back in the day, tell me your favorite in the comments and let me know which one you'd bring back tomorrow.